HD, what's up, buddy? Finally getting to reply to your video. I'm in a different position. I'm laying down, so I'm trying something different. I think I kind of look sexy like this. That's for you to judge. So anyways, let me get into your video. I hope I keep this really concise. I got a lot of notes here, and I didn't really organize them that well. I wanted to say really quick, I don't want to get into the argument of objective versus subjective morality. That's not where this conversation started between me and James. So I don't even want to go into that tangent. We'll stick to what the topic is about, like child molestation and everything you addressed in your video response to me. So we'll go with that. The first thing I noticed in your video, and I can start this response to you in the form of a question. Why do you preface your video stating that you're going to, you might be defending some unsavory positions? If these positions aren't wrong to begin with, why would you even preface your video like this if you don't even realize that they're wrong in and of themselves? And you bring up intent and consequence with the example I brought up in Stickum and also in my video. First thing I want to say about this is that intent is so important when it comes to morality and when it comes to actions that we do. It's a major component of the action itself. Intent defines the action of what sort it is. Even in courts of law, intent can either send you to the death penalty or just a few months in the local jail, or maybe even less. So I want to say that intent has everything to do with an action. You can't just have an action without intent. I think you got to look at the whole thing, and this is how you deem if something is moral or immoral. I am not sure I agree with your statement that an action is right until you can show that it is wrong. I want to say at least 3 things about this. Why do you personally think that child molestation is wrong? You seem to come to this conclusion like the vast majority of us have. So in saying that, I would ask you, how can you show that this is not wrong? Can you argue for child molestation? And I would say that what makes it wrong is the fact that it cannot be justified. You can't take pleasure as a sufficient justification for what you do to that child. I have yet to hear how you can reason this, how this can sufficiently justify the harm done to the child. I haven't heard it yet. And you bring up a drinking glass of water, and you're trying to equate that with child molestation, or how you don't necessarily need to justify it. It's an action that we see in reality, and you would have to show that it's wrong. And I understand what you're saying here. I would say that it doesn't need justification because it's inconsequential, and it's kind of hard to define what that means. But the reason I would say that child molestation requires justification is because of the effects you produce in the child, and also in regards to the child's parents. You have all of these people that are affected by this act. You have to give reason for what you did. We are taking account of what's taken place in reality. Drinking a glass of water is inconsequential, and those two don't compare at all. And I've never stated, in fact, in a comment, in the comment section of one of James's videos, I've never said that the person who intends to molest the child is intending harm to the child, per se. I'm sure there are cases where this happens. But in saying that, I would say by now, most of us know that child molestation does cause harm, even if your intent is not to harm the child violently, so to speak. But we know that it does cause harm, so you can't really get out of that. So you can't really say that you're ignorant on that. So they may not intend to cause harm, so to speak, but what they intend to do is selfishly derive pleasure with a total lack of concern for the child's well-being. So again, it's not as though they intend to cause harm. They intend to get pleasure at the expense of the child's emotional and physical well-being. Yet, even though the intent is not harm, it's pleasure now, this still doesn't justify it. Which is what I've been saying from the beginning. And if this is not true, then argue for me how pleasure does in fact justify what has been done to the child. This is what I'm asking for. This is what I want to hear from either you or anybody else out there. And this is something I think you mentioned in your video or in the comments section, or maybe I'm just pulling it out of my butt. Even if it's the case, let's go back to this intent. The perpetrator is not intending harm; they're intending to derive pleasure from it. Even if they wish that the child gets pleasure from it, even if the child gets pleasure from it, it's still a matter of the perpetrator getting pleasure from that. It's not that they're trying to. It gives them pleasure to give pleasure to the child, is what I'm saying. So it's still all about them. They're not doing it on behalf of the child. They're doing it for them. They get pleasure out of it, even if the child is getting pleasure, which most cases, you've said it yourself, that doesn't happen. So, and I agree. And then you mentioned that we harm our children all of the time, and that's a tricky word when you say harm our children. And I know what you mean by this, and you mean like by disciplinary action, consequence, and character building. But again, that's the thing I'm saying. Those things can be justified because you're doing it for the well-being of your child, to help that child mature. You are not doing it at the child's expense or for your selfish gain or your pleasure. You're not taking anything from the child, so to speak. So it's not so much the harm in that regard. It's the intent or purpose for that harm, the disciplinary action, the character building, those sort of things. There's an intent to it. There's a goal in mind. And that's the big difference. I see no goal whatsoever to molest a child. There's no goal in mind. There's nothing for the child's benefit there. So I don't understand that comparison. And this is where you kind of lost me. I asked for a justification for how pleasure is a sufficient reason to sexually abuse a child, and you mentioned how after the fact, how these sort of things can actually build character and kind of teach this child how to deal with adversity when they grow up. They learn from this experience. I don't get that at all. I don't get why you say that. The reason I say that is, should the child molester take credit for that? That they can justify what they did because later in life this person actually grew as a person, learned how to deal with adversity? That makes no sense whatsoever. Is that a reason they should molest children? I don't get that again. And the fact that they may learn something or actually grow as a person because of this, that's not a foregone conclusion. My sister was molested and raped in the late 80s and early 90s, and she is still not completely recovered. There hasn't been some big positive bonus from all of those experiences. I would say that she's been hindered to this very day in many respects. If you met her, you'd know, and I could probably point out I could make a connection for you. I don't deny what you're saying. There are cases where people can actually take a negative experience and turn it around, and it ends up being a benefit. But those are byproducts of the experience. Those are not reasons that the experience should happen. And that's what you got to understand here. Those do not justify it. That's not a reason that a perpetrator should molest a child, because those things may or may not happen. There's no connection there at all.